I've reached the point of the day where the sun is in my face coming through the windows here. It's lovely. My name is Sarah. I have sun in my eyes, and I am going to talk to you about how I did with my 2016 goals. And I know I wasn't a booktuber when I first started, but I did have some goals that I wanted to meet anyway. And I can say I did pretty well. One of the goals I had was to read less, and I definitely accomplished this goal. I read 198 books in 2015. In 2016, I read 164 books. So that was a win. The reason I had set this goal was because I wanted to read some larger books and some classics. And that was also highly successful this year. I participated in the Back to the Classics 2016 challenge, which I finished reading 12 books. And so that was hosted by Books and Chocolate. The first book was a 19th century classic, which I read The Woman in White. A 20th century classic, which I read Animal Farm. A classic by a woman author, which is Frankenstein. A classic in translation, I read The Three Musketeers. A classic by a non-white author, I read The Pillow Book of Tsai Shing-yong. An adventure classic, I read The Time Machine. A fantasy, science fiction, or dystopian classic, I read The Martian Chronicles. A classic detective novel, I read And Then There Were None. A classic which includes the name of a place in the title, I read Cold Comfort Farm. A classic which has been banned or censored, I read Lord of the Flies. Reread a classic you read for school, I read Great Expectations. And a volume of classic short stories, I read Dubliners. In addition to this though, according to my spreadsheet, I used Brock's spreadsheet for last year. The only thing that I didn't keep up with was the buying, because it got depressing. Because I ended this year with way more books than I started. I think I am up to 303 that I need to read. And I know that's nothing for some people and a lot for other people, but it's a number I'm uncomfortable with. So we're gonna work on that this year. Sorry, I have my spreadsheet on my phone, so I'm trying to look here. So a classic, I take the typical definition of a classic that the groups use, which is 50 years prior, unless the author is deceased, for classics. So according to the spreadsheet, I read 14 books that were published prior to 1920. I read 2 books from the 1930s, 2 books from the 1940s, 2 books from the 1950s, and 1 book from the 1960s. And I know that that book was considered a classic. It wasn't too late in the year. I read no book from the 1970s, which was kind of weird. And I read a book that was published in the 80s and the 90s, 14 books in the 2000s, 75 books 2010 to 2015, and I read 52 new release books. Who knew? I love this spreadsheet. My best month for quantity of books read was March. And that's because I take 2 weeks off from work and we go to Vermont and we all sit around the fire and do nothing but read for a week. Sometimes we go out and cross-country ski, but I get a lot of reading done that week, and I read 17 books in March. The other books tied June, I read 16 books. That's pretty impressive right there. Probably because I was done homeschooling my daughter. And I actually read 15 books in December. Who knew? My worst reading month for quantity of books were May and August. Probably because I was floating in the pool and having fun and playing around and stuff and not reading so much, which is fine because my worst reading months I read 11 books. So I think we're okay. So I basically met my goals as well as could be expected, with the exception of buying books. I bought way too many books, most likely because I subscribe to a lot of book boxes. That is bad for the wallet and for the bookcase, because I didn't read a whole lot of the books that came in the book boxes, which is kind of sad, which is why this year I really want to make sure that I read those books within a couple months, because there's no point in getting them otherwise. Interesting to note, I read most of the books in hardcover, and I think that is likely because I did read a lot of new releases, and also BookTube has made me buy books. Has definitely encouraged book buying. So I am getting books and not waiting for a year for the softcover book to come out. So it's not very surprising. I read 42% of the books that I read were in hardcover. I definitely read mostly female authors, 73%. Also likely because I enjoy romance and chick lit, which I think were my romance was the most read, followed by fantasy this year, which is surprising because I've never really read a lot of fantasy, but I think a lot of the young adult books are fantasy nowadays, so maybe that's why the increase in that. But I read a wide variety of books, several, like 8 nonfiction, adventure books, historical fiction, again, a lot of classics. I even read a few short fiction novellas, 3 biographies, 4 plays. I mean, I'm very happy with how widely I read and with the quantity I read. So, I mean, I wish I had read books that I enjoyed more sometimes, because I ended really on a low note with the quality of the book somehow. Other than that, I really can't complain about 2016. It was a pretty good reading year for me. I met my goals. I read less. I read lots of classics. That's what I wanted to do. And now this year is a whole new ball game. So I'm going to get going on that. And you get going on it too. So I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.